Today's episode features a first for Bombad Radio. Our guest has been nominated for a BAFTA and many other awards related to music. He's the composer for Mass Effect 1 through 3, Red Orchestra 2, Conclave, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 Enhanced Editions. The music for this episode is also provided by our guest, who is none other than composer Sam Hulick. Welcome to the show, Sam Hulick.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Do you want us to refer to you as Sam, Mr. Hulick?
Call me Sam. That works.
Sam, okay. So I guess the first thing we'd like you to do is introduce yourself to the fans, with the first question being, how did you start composing music? And what is your background in music as far as, composition? Like, what's your style?
It's actually kind of funny you mention it, because I don't really have a formal background in music. People are kind of surprised when I tell them that I actually majored in computer science. So
he's a nerd.
Yeah.
We love him already. He's a nerd.
Oh, yeah. You have no idea. Like, I spent hours in the computer labs. Most of them were like Windows, and I would always gravitate towards the Sun Unix lab. So, yeah, big time. Yeah, I know.
Unix. Now I super nerd. I love this guy.
Yeah, this is way back when, too, when I'm kind of old, actually. I'm dating myself here. But this is back in the time of dial-up modems, and we didn't really have easy access to the internet. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't like commercialized like it is now. And so
yeah, I know what you're talking about. The days of the 14.4, and then the 28.8, and then when the 56 came out, we were all like, "Oh my god!"
I know, it's so fast, I can't believe it. Yeah, so that's my background is really in computers, and I guess music to an extent too. I had a musical family. My dad played in bands, and I was always in that environment. Because it's kind of funny, like our house at the time, you walk into the foyer, and it's normal, closet, coats in there, and then you open up these sliding doors, and there's a music studio, like right on the main level when you walk in. So he basically, he's like, you know what, living room, screw that. Right? We're just gonna gut the living room out and put in, mixing console, keyboards, microphones. It was a really fun environment to grow up in and have all that stuff at my fingertips. So, but before that, actually, I made music on the computer using trackers. Which, is really, it's old school, and there's no...
Very.
I don't know. It is. It's very mechanical in a way. I don't know. It was, because I was hearing stuff, like the games at the time, I kind of skipped the whole Nintendo generation. Like, people always ask me, like, hey, what do you think of, the soundtrack for, I don't know, just insert Nintendo game here that everyone else knows. And I'm like, well, I played it a few times, but, that's about it. And, I kind of, I grew up on ColecoVision.
Oh, dude, ColecoVision, rock on. I had one of those.
I know. I was obsessed because, I was a big arcade game junkie. And, that gets kind of pricey after a while. Not that we care as kids. It's really the parents who kind of shoulder.
Yeah, it's like, just give me the stack of quarters.
Right. $20, sweet. But, and ColecoVision had a lot of some arcade copies, and they were kind of close. But, the goal was always to try and get to as close as the arcade experience as possible, graphics-wise. So actually, my first computer was an Amiga 1000. Actually, 500? 1000. The Amiga 1000.
Nice.
Commodore was my first computer, which at the time it was one of the most advanced as far as graphics and sound. I mean, it was kind of a big deal that it could do like 4096 colors. That was one of the big selling points, and I believe they actually had 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit sound at the time. So, it was a pretty advanced platform for gaming. And it just wasn't very popular. That's all.
Yeah, because it was pricey as heck.
Yeah, a little bit. I think the first one I got was used actually. Some guy had it and he sold it for a decent price, but I was hooked. I mean, I kind of rode that Amiga wave for a while, and I went from like 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000, and so a lot of the games I played were on the Amiga, and some of those included the Fairy Tale Adventure, and some of these are like multi-platform. Like these are also on, I guess they were on PC at the time, or wasn't Fairy Tale also on Sega Genesis at one point?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was on. It was either Sega
I
Genesis or the
think it
Master
was
System.
Sega Genesis or Saturn, one of the two.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
could
it
have
was
sworn they did that on the Master System.
maybe. Yeah, I can't remember. But anyway, on the Amiga, it was on the Amiga as well, and it was more advanced, I think, as far as graphics and sound, and the music was great. A guy named David Joyner, if I recall, he actually coded the game and did the music. So I'm like, that's pretty hardcore, and he did a really good job too. It was really catchy.
Yeah,
And
really. If you're coding game and doing the music for it, man. I mean, pardon the
right,
French, but you're kind of a badass back then.
exactly. It's like I can make games and music, and yeah,
It's like,
it
what
was.
do I need two other people for?
Yeah, for all I know, he probably did the whole thing himself. I don't actually know, but that kind of got me hooked on all the RPG stuff and Bard's Tale, of course.
Oh, Bart's Tale is so awesome.
It was. I used to spend like crazy amount of hours playing that game, and a buddy of mine would come over and we'd just sit there and like play all night long on Bard's Tale, and yeah,
Man,
that
I'm actually
game.
trying to build an old computer, old and like with really old parts, just so that way I can run it.
Yeah, there's an Amiga emulator.
Hmm.
I don't know if we should be talking about such things on the podcast, but
Well, we know emulators exist, so we're okay.
yeah, just make sure you legally own the game you're emulating, right?
Have
Right.
it.
Yeah, I have like 20 arcade games in my basement. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I totally have like all these.
Yes, I own every Atari game ever made.
Yes, I own every Super Nintendo game that's ever existed in any country. I totally own them. I have stacks of them in my room.
I just misplaced them, that's all.
Yes, yes. They're in my parents' house. Yeah. In the basement. Yeah. Water damage. Yeah. That's it. Water damage.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, moving along.
So there's an Amiga emulator. I think it's just Windows only. I'm not sure if it's on Mac, but you can load up these games and play them. Like Fairy Tale works okay.
Nice.
Shadow of the Beast was another great series. I think that was Amiga only. You guys heard of that one?
Yeah, I've heard of Shadow of the Beast.
Yeah.
I think I played like the second one.
I played the second and the third one was the one that kind of really stuck with me, especially musically. Tim Wright did the music for it, and he did a lot of music for Psygnosis back then in the Amiga days. And so yeah, like all these soundtracks from these games, as low tech as they were, I mean, they're still really catchy and melodic, and that kind of got me interested. And then plus the studio upstairs and the keyboards, and I started just kind of experimenting and exploring music. So, and it's funny because initially, like my influences were more, I had a mindset to get into film, I guess. I mean, I was just kind of exploring and writing my own stuff, but as a career, it wasn't really like, I had
It was
decided.
more of a hobby.
Yeah, more of a hobby,
I
and
get you.
just kind of learning and not really focused on a career at that point. But I was like, yeah, film music, that's cool. And I was into Danny Elfman and John Williams and all that stuff. And
Oh yeah, there you go. Two of the greats.
yeah, two of the greats. There are many, many. Lately it's kind of like Thomas Newman is my hero. But anyway,
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
no, his stuff is excellent. But yeah, so my dad played in bands for all of his life, and we had a family friend who lived with us, and he was kind of more studied in like classical, and so it was from him. He was kind of like a mentor to me, and he would, I'd be writing music, and he would catch me and say, "Well, try this," and he introduced these kind of rules that were simple enough for me to understand. Someone who didn't have any musical training, because if he started talking about the 5/5 and dominant sevenths, and I would have been like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But
Like,
so he had
okay.
a good way of explaining these things, just simple stuff, and so that kind of stuck with me. And yeah, so I guess at some point I just realized the music in video games was getting better, higher quality, and sample based. And this is like, I think around the time when they were using like CD-based samples. I mean, they had sample banks in keyboards. Like I had a Roland XP80, which had very kind of cut back samples, I mean, compared to what we have today. But there were still samples on ROM chips in the keyboard, and they were pretty decent. And but there were people out there who were recording stuff that sounded better than what I was doing. And a couple of the soundtracks, like for Heroes of Might and Magic 3, I can't remember who. I know Rob King pitched in on it, and I can't remember. There were like two other guys. And that soundtrack like really struck me. I was like, wow, this sounds fantastic. If I can get my stuff to sound like this, then I will be king composer. So I wrote these guys, and you know, some of them were using, I think they were Akai CD-based samples, and then I got in touch with Jeremy Soule actually, way back when. I forget what he was working on at the time. This is like over 10 years ago. And he was very helpful, and he told me, you know, about his sounds and what he used in this. So then it hit me. I realized, gee, this stuff's kind of expensive.
Yeah, that recording equipment definitely not on the cheap.
No, I mean, like just the hardware alone. You can keep it kind of simple with the hardware, but you know, software samples, it's like, man, I realized the price tag, you know, sticker shock kind of got to me. But you know, at the time, way back in late 90s, you know, I was kind of exploring this as a hobby. I was still learning and still just writing stuff on the side, and I was working my day job, basically, like programming, web development. And so that, I think that's like, it paid the bills and allowed me to use that money to invest in music equipment and software. So that was, because you can't just like, I don't know how easy it is to just, you know, jump right out of school and then work in music and be able to afford all this expensive stuff. So, yeah, if it weren't for that, I don't know if I would have been able to do all this. So
I have two questions then. The first one being, so other than helping you afford to be able to be a composer, did you find computer programming helpful to compose it, your composition? And the second one, what was the first song you composed and sold?
does programming help with music composition? I guess, I don't know, music to me, it's kind of like I guess it's kind of a mix of left and right brain. I mean, there's this right brain part where it's just, I guess it depends on what you're working on, and like there are times when I'm writing stuff and left brain just goes to sleep, you know, and it's just more, it's all right brain and how it sounds and how it feels, and there's like just not a lot of logic to it. And then there's some cases where, you know, left brain kicks in and I'm analyzing patterns and chords and in you know, E flat minor, how am I going to get there from here? And I don't know. I mean, it's actually funny you mention that, because there are a lot of people that I've talked to who are composers, and they may not have like, you know, professional backgrounds in programming, but they've at least dabbled with it, or it was a hobby, or they have an interest in programming. So there is some kind of parallel there. I'm not quite sure what it is. The first tune that I wrote and sold, oh, that's easy. I think that would be from Maximo versus Army of Zin back in 2003, which is my first professional gig. Mm-hmm. I worked with Tommy Tallarico on that one. Capcom was his client, and he needed some help with the soundtrack, so he got in touch with me. And this is kind of how I got discovered. I was part of an organization called GANG. It stands for Game Audio Network Guild. That's a great opportunity, by the way, Caleb. Like, if you want to network with composers and audio people, GANG is a way to go about it, because there are a ton of professionals there. There are a lot of other people who are getting into the industry, and there's opportunities that GANG offers. For instance, there's I don't know if they still have the contest or not, but they used to have two contests every year. One is for composers, and one is for sound designers. And so there's a contest for the composers, and I went ahead and decided to submit a piece. So I wrote this piece.
So Caleb has a question.
Yes. Sorry.
So when you said you submitted a song for a competition, did that really like help you improve with your video game composing, like from the feedback from that competition?
I guess so. I mean, I was always kind of before that, I was in touch with people who were working in the industry, either as composers or audio directors who typically hire composers. And so I had people that I could talk to and send pieces and just be like, hey, what do you think of this? And they'd write back and say, well, you know, you could do this differently. And that was helpful. So I think up to that point, you know, the contest, I felt confident enough by then to submit something. And so where was I? Yeah, so the contest, I won that contest, and that was some really good exposure. And that kind of led up to me working with Tommy Tallarico on Maximo versus Army of Zin. And I wrote 8 minutes of music for that. So yeah, that was my first professional gig. And yeah, I kind of went on from there. Yeah, I can go on if you want about Brainless Chat.
So, what other big name composers, either in video games or since full-on movie composers score for video games nowadays, have you also had a chance to work with, and what have you learned from them, if anything?
I've worked with Tommy on the Capcom gig, and Jack Wall was someone that was a really great experience. If you want, I can talk about that one a little bit. That's
Okay, let's talk about that. So, how did you get put on, start working with Jack Wall and so on?
Yeah, so I met Jack. I'm kind of hazy with years sometimes. I have a bad memory. It's like, was that 2004, 2005? Especially when you go to the Game Developers Conference every single year, they all kind of blur together. Something to do with the alcohol, maybe. Yeah, so 2005, I want to say. I believe that was my first time going to GDC. And I met Jack Wall. And this is something else that was also related to the Game Audio Network Guild. They have a demo derby, and they still have this, actually. So basically what you do is people submit music that they want critiqued by a panel of professionals. And so at the Game Developers Conference, everyone shows up in a room, and there's a panel of people, and they go through a stack of CDs and pop them in and listen to it, and then give you feedback on, everything from mix to composition to, whatever they can identify in your piece. It's kind of nerve-wracking because you're in a room full of other people, and they're just, they're talking about your stuff and how you can improve it in front of this big group. So I did that one year. I put together a demo reel. It was video and audio. So what I'd done is I'd put together a bunch of pieces that I felt were good, and I set them to game footage, video footage. So like, for example, I had a piece that sounded kind of Fable-y. So I set that to game footage of Fable. And so Jack was on that panel, and incidentally, by the way, like they played my stuff, and I guess it was pretty well received because no one had any kind of critique. There's like, sounds great, keep doing what you do. And so later that day, I was talking to Jack, and just chatting a bit, and that connection really led to Mass Effect because there was a point later where he wrote me an email. Actually, I'm a little foggy on this part. Somebody, I think at BioWare, reached out, and they said that Jack Wall recommended me to demo for this project because he was busy.
Let's pause right here to bring a word from our sponsors, Audible.com. For you, the listeners of Bombad Radio, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you an opportunity to check out their service. Yes, that is free. If you do not like it, you can cancel and you get to keep the book. Today I would like to recommend one of my favorite audiobooks I've ever gotten from Audible.com. That is Mass Effect Revelation. Since we have the composer for the Mass Effect series on today, I thought I'd recommend you one of the best books from that series. The book Mass Effect Revelation takes place before Mass Effect 1 and talks about how Saren got hold of Reaper technology, talks about how David Anderson was trying out to be a Spectre and what happened with that. It's the prequel to the series and answers a lot of the questions which you might have from just playing the game. I fully recommend it. The book is by Drew Karpyshyn, and it is narrated by David Kalashi. It is well worth your time, and you could use it, and you can get it free today. Again, that is audibletrial.com/bombadradio for your free audiobook download of Mass Effect Revelation by Drew Karpyshyn.
Mass Effect 1 through 3 is probably the most famous work you've done so far. You've gotten a BAFTA nomination, I believe, for Mass Effect 2.
Yeah, right.
And you've worked on several of the expansions and so on. So with Mass Effect, that is just looking at the credits on the soundtrack. there are lots of composers that work together for those soundtracks. So what was it like working together on a soundtrack as a whole? Because even if you didn't necessarily compose the same piece, you still have to make a cohesive sound for the game. So what was it like working on a soundtrack that was such a large effort with a lot of different composers? And how do you feel you did in the end with a cohesive sound for a very epic game series?
I think it turned out. I think it turned out really well. We didn't really. I don't know. People have this idea that everyone collaborated very closely, but we really didn't. I would say we worked the closest, probably on the. Well, it's hard to say because on the second one, it was more organized. First one, we were kind of new, or I was definitely new to working on a game of that size, and also new to working on a group project. So, Mass Effect 1, started off with Jack and myself for quite a stretch, and then at the end, we just kind of needed some extra help. So, Jack brought in Richard Jakes and David Cates to pitch in on cinematics and some extra levels at the end. So mostly it was like this task force of people to just take this big pile of music that's assigned to us and just divvy it up. I'll work on this part, I'll work on this part. And, as far as maintaining a cohesive sound, we're not in the same place, obviously. I mean, Jack and David are both in LA. Richard Jakes is in the UK, and I'm in Chicago. So the best we could really do is just kind of talk to each other as far as like, hey, what synths do you use, or what sample libraries? And I think we all had some stuff in common. We had I can't remember if Omnisphere was out at the time. I think it was still Atmosphere back then. So there's that, and then we had a bunch of synths from Arturia. They make a lot of these old school analogs like Moog, Mini Moog. What else? The CS80. So I think we all had those in common for sure. That was kind of like the glue that made it all stick together. So Mass Effect 2, we had a bit of a different layout because we had learned from our mistakes in the first one, and as far as being more organized. And so all the stuff that we turned in went through Jack. So basically, and it was also like we each took chunks of levels instead of just scoring a level on one planet and then combat for a different one. We would just take a chunk. Like, I wrote all the music for the mission where you were on the planet with Jacob's father. So that whole thing is all mine. So it's like there's groups, and Jimmy Henson did the stuff for Samara, and I think that worked out a little better.
Was there any difference with the third game then for how you guys divided it up, or did you pretty much follow the Mass Effect 2 format?
No, it was different. In Mass Effect 3, it felt kind of more like one, just in the sense that the composers were, I guess I'm saying there's no lead composer really as far as Mass Effect 3 goes. So we were all reporting directly to BioWare. So, my contact was with the audio lead over at BioWare, and he would just say, we need this, you're going to be scoring this. And it was kind of spread out. Like I did the music for, like the main menu and the opening title sequence, some of the stuff in Earth, and then Mars is like, as far as I know, Mars is all mine. Sometimes last minute they'll like take music from someone else and drop it in, like if something needs extra stuff. But yeah, Mars is pretty much mine, and then the end sequence stuff, a large part of the ending stuff is mine. So it's kind of spread out, but it's a similar kind of, not really working directly with any of the other composers. As far as I know, the only guys who really work that closely together on the team were Chris and Sasha.
Working on, the whole Mass Effect series with, all the different composers, like you were saying, taking different hunks of levels and whatnot. Like, did you have any real significant input on the style of the music for the game, or was it something more like, here's how they're doing it, and you had to kind of sort of match up the tone of the music?
No, it's really, this is another thing too. This is really, because a lot of people don't really know how the process works. They have an idea that, a game comes out and the composer comes in and says, well, here's my vision for this game and I'm going to write it this way. And that's really not how it goes. Really, it's the project director and audio team and producers telling the composers, here's our vision. Here's the kind of sound we like. What can you do with that? And that's how it was. So really, it's like the Mass Effect sound, although Jack and I kind of brought it into the world. Really, it's the idea of Casey Hudson and I hope I don't forget anyone. Casey Hudson, Steve Sim, Michael Kent, and I believe it was those guys really who brought us on, and like, we like Tangerine Dream and Blade Runner, and what else? Casey is a big fan of Jerry Goldsmith's work on like Star Trek, so that was also a reference too. So they had these references and ideas, and they kind of threw it at us, and you know, Jack demo. This is before we were hired officially, but Jack demoed for it. I did some demo stuff, and yeah, I guess we nailed it. So
Yeah, you definitely nailed it. So
Yes.
yeah, there was some pretty weird references too. Like I think if I remember right, is it called Boards of Canada? That was mentioned once, and it wasn't really like in the beginning during the demo process. We were still trying to like feel it out. I still have some of the old demo tracks actually, and they sound kind of Mass Effecty, but not quite. It's like I hadn't quite reached that point yet. But then the demo piece actually that really convinced them is it's the Galaxy Map tune. Uncharted Worlds was actually written before I was really hired. That was a demo piece, and the inspiration for it, like it's kind of funny, but they're talking about Tangerine Dream, and they did the soundtrack for Risky Business, and so they're like, check out Risky Business, and listen to the soundtrack. So I did, and the scene there's that subway train scene, and the track is called "Love on a Real Train," I think. And that piece kind of basically is the inspiration for the Galaxy Map tune because they were going for this multi-layered, multi-textured piece, and so yeah, that was the start of it all. Way back in what was like 2004.
okay, so Caleb has another question for you.
So when you said when you were working with other composers on the same game and you used the same sample sets, were those sample sets provided by the people employing you, or was that like the samples individually owned by the composers?
No, it's basically yeah, it falls to us to purchase all this stuff. Basically, like since we're freelance, we don't really work for the company as an employee. So all of our gear and software and equipment, we have to purchase it ourselves. Thank God for tax write-offs, right?
Yeah.
Amen for that.
You got to compose the extended cut. And so a lot of the compositions in the extended cut seem to be enhancing or expanding on the theme that you already had composed for the ending of the game, which you said is basically yours. So did you like the opportunity to go expand that song, that idea which you had for the end of the game? Because I believe you added the extended cut, what, 16, 17 minutes more was on that soundtrack?
Yeah, something like
Did
yeah, it was
yeah.
to go back and add on to it. And that last track, An End Once and For All, which is written by myself and Clint Mansell, that one got extended quite a bit. They had to add some extra scenes in there, and there's a new ending, which people liked actually. I think the ending in Mass Effect 3 was it's that cacophony of sound. It's supposed to be like that because what's happening in the last scene with the ship, you're not sure if it's, is the Normandy still there, and it's kind of this ruckus, and some people are like, oh, it's very jarring. Well, that's how it was written. But now there's like this kind of nice resolution ending that people liked a lot. So yeah, it was great to go back and add on new music for the new scenes that they added on.
Okay, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit. You composed for Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition, a
Yep.
game which is, well, the original came out, what, 2000?
90,
98? Somewhere in there.
yeah.
So what was it like going into a game that is that old and taking a soundtrack which is, a lot of people at least recognize, but of course it is quite dated, and making it to something new, making it to something that will work in a modern day video game world where they expect a lot more. So what were some of your influences and ideas when you approached the Baldur's Gate Enhanced Edition music-wise?
Well, it was kind of scary to be honest, because it is an old game. It's been around since '98, and it has a huge fan base. I mean, it was kind of revolutionary for its time because if you go back and look at like reviews, they're all like glowing reviews from Game Informer, like 9.8 or something out of 10, and it kind of raised the bar. So musically, to be asked to work on it, it's like, well, crap, I can't really stray too far, at least not initially, because there are expectations there, and it's kind of like, you take the helm, and the fan base is kind of looking at you like, don't mess this up. There are people on forums who are like, don't mess it up. Someone is kind of violent. I wasn't on the forum, so he didn't know I was reading it, but he said something that was kind of like, I'll kill him. I was like, whoa.
It's like, whoa, dude, no pressure, no pressure.
Yeah, right. No pressure or anything. So I guess, I was fortunate in the sense that Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 soundtracks were ones that really influenced me. So I knew them really well. So I kind of just had this intuitive sense of what made it sound Baldur's Gatey. So yeah, so the plan was to just kind of ease my way in and try to get as close to that sound as possible, with obviously newer tech and newer samples, but musically speaking, just kind of stick to that sound. And it worked. I mean, we have the game's out now, and even before game launch, there were like music snippets released, and people, the response was very positive. People were like, some people were just kind of like, yeah, I knew it. I knew it'd be fine. And some people were like, well, I wasn't sure, but I'm relieved to hear that. It's kind of like it falls right into that world perfectly. So, yeah, I was really happy to hear that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, hearing like it must be gratifying, to hear the fans going, "Oh, this kicks butt."
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, especially the ones who may have doubted you at first, because then initially they're like, I don't know, man, and then you crank out the music and they hear it and like, wow, it's great. And so it's like all the more kind of reassuring to have turned the doubters.
Oh, for sure. Especially, you're going, "All right, I don't have to worry about death threats. Sweet."
No more people who want to kill me if I get it wrong. But yeah, the funny thing is actually the music, the music engine itself and the software is still rather dated. So we don't have some of the luxuries like with Mass Effect where they're using Wise, which is this interactive audio engine where you can it's intelligent. Like you can have multiple streams of music and it can crossfade them. It has a sense of like BPMs. So you tell it, after this measure, stop and then fade out and then crossfade this piece in. Whereas the Baldur's Gate music engine is like it's old and it hasn't really been reworked entirely. So like the combat pieces are really intensive. Like I have to go in there, and the way it's set up is that there are different outros or endings, depending on where you are in the combat tune. Because if you just have one outro, it may not fit depending on when the combat ends. So there's usually like 3 or 4 outros, and then I have to take the tune into Adobe Audition and then slice up like 3 to 5 second segments so that there are exit points every once in a while, and then they have to tie into all these endings, and it's kind of a technical challenge. And there's like documents on this online you can read up on the music format. It tells you how the .mus files work, and it's pretty crazy.
So it's like super labor intensive. Oh my God. And as soon as you're done, the head slams onto the keyboard.
Exactly. Well, actually, it's not too bad. I guess my computer geek background comes in handy where I'm like, yeah, this is cool. File formats I can deal with,
So did that prepare you to be ready for Baldur's Gate 2, which is perhaps even more respected than Baldur's Gate 1 is?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I've started working on it. We're just kind of musically getting into the initial stages of, deciding, what's going to have music, what's not, what moments need to be scored. So, I mean, because there's new stuff added there. They have these characters that they've carried on from Baldur's Gate 1 Enhanced Edition that are coming back in 2. And hopefully I'm not divulging too much here, but I think I'll just I'll leave it at that. But basically, yeah.
Well, most of us have played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 religiously, so
True.
there's not too much you can spoil about it unless they've changed the entire game, which they haven't really.
Well, I mean, like the new content in Baldur's Gate Enhanced.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
Those spoilers, go play it if you want to know, Jeremiah.
Cannot talk about it. So, Yeah, but I basically just started. I'm wrapping up my music, the soundtrack for Conclave, and then Baldur's Gate 2 comes after that.
Let's talk about Conclave then. That's a current project a lot of people probably have not heard of. So what can you tell us about Conclave and your work in that with that game?
Yes, please do. In fact, pretend like I've never heard of it. In fact, don't pretend. I don't even know Conclave, so please sell me on this because I want to actually hear about it.
Okay, I'll try. I'm not sure if I can do as good a job as the creators can. Yeah, basically, one day out of the blue, I got an email from someone, and I think he was asking about Mass Effect soundtrack stuff, like, hey, is this available somewhere? Can I buy whatever? And then he had this crazy kind of side note, like, oh, by the way, I'm on this team of developers, and we're making this online tabletop RPG game. Do you, what are your rates like? And so we started talking about stuff as far as working on their game, and yeah, it just kind of came together. Basically, these guys, there were 3 people on the team initially, and the idea hit them like 4 or 5 years ago. They wanted this kind of social online experience of tabletop gaming. So it's kind of like, taking the experience of sitting down with some friends over, Dungeons and Dragons, but not in person though, like over the net, and have that kind of old school, moving character tiles over a grid. So they were looking for that and they couldn't find it. I guess nothing kind of met their standard, and so they decided, let's make our own. And the initial plan, I think they were looking at Facebook, but there were some constraints there that they didn't like, so they just developed it from the ground up, basically. I think using Ruby on Rails, and so it's launched. So they have this game. It's out now, but they wanted to kind of enhance it, with sound effects and
That does sound kind of cool, actually. I'm big on tabletop, so
it's really sweet. It's actually, and it's up now. It's if you go to playconclave.com, the game is fully playable, and they're always adding on to it. They so I guess I'll go back a little bit. They had a plan to do a Kickstarter to raise funds for sound, music, and just for their own time in programming and making new quests and adding new features to it. So they got in touch with me, and I said I wanted to check it out and just get a sense of the game and the art and just the whole world. And I liked it. I was like, yeah, you can count me in. And so they made a deal with my agent and got it basically slated for 10 minutes of music for the game. Artwork is incredible, by the way. The artist, his name is Chris Rahn. What is it? Rahn. And he's worked on, I think, like art for Magic the Gathering. He's on work for Wizards of the Coast, and I know it's kick-ass. And like just the art itself is so inspiring. I can just sit there and just soak it up and write all this stuff, and then the story stuff, and just it's really well written. And yeah, so it's just kind of came out of nowhere, and then they brought me on, and it's wrapping it up now, and it's about 10 minutes of music. There will be a soundtrack release, digital and physical, and so that's Conclave in a nutshell. So yeah, it's like a turn-based RPG, and you can assemble a party, you can invite friends to join you, and there's a chat window, but you can also vote on things. So they'll have like a story choice. They'll be like, you're at an inn, and the barkeeper hears some noises and goes outside with a broom. Do you want to go help him, or do you want to stay in the bar and get wasted? And there's that's not really the option. I made that up. So
that'd be a cool
buttons.
option, though. I'm not gonna lie.
I'll just keep my face in my mug of ale.
Bring me my turkey leg, bar wench.
So there are these buttons at the bottom where the people in your party can vote, basically, and the high vote wins. So yeah, it's a really cool concept, and yeah, it's exciting to see where they'll take it, especially since they have this whole world created, and I was just emailing one of the guys and saying it'd be cool to do another Kickstarter, just take like a vertical slice of like a different type of game, like like voice acting or some kind of more like not turn-based, basically, just taking the universe and putting it in a different kind of game genre would be really cool. So anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent.
We're going to talk about Red Orchestra 2 a little bit. That game probably has the most different style musically for the stuff that you've done, and it's very much orchestral based with a lot of Russian, Russian chants and so on. So, first of all, how were you approached to compose Red Orchestra 2, and what was your approach musically for composing for that game? Because it is very different from Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 1, which you had previously done. So how did you approach that one, and what was your experience?
That whole thing started off, I'm not going to say which party I crashed, but I crashed a party at the Game Developers Conference. It's kind of funny. I actually sort of got in by posing as a bodyguard for a bunch of game models. So,
Nice.
yes, yeah, it was interesting. Anyway, so that's another story for another time. So yeah, I was at this party and I met these guys just kind of randomly, and they were fans of my stuff on Mass Effect 1, and they were this indie game company on the East Coast near Atlanta. So we were talking, and they were telling me about this game that they're working on, Red Orchestra 2, and yeah, we exchanged cards, and it's just kind of a casual, like, hey, we should keep in touch. So I went back home, and basically I demoed for the project. There was a brief demo process, and they gave their musical direction. They're looking for kind of like they were fans of the score from Enemy at the Gates, but they kind of wanted like an old European twist on it. Like they didn't want it like a modern film score. They kind of wanted it mixed in with the classical Russian and classical German sound. So I demoed for that, and I got the contract, obviously. There was kind of a research process involved. Like I really had to get, into the history of it and kind of get into the emotions of it, which, I mean, it's kind of silly to say because you can't really possibly imagine what it's like, to be out there, just involved in a war like that. So the best I could do really is just read about it. And there's a documentary on the Battle of Stalingrad that I watched where they talk about what happened, and they have interviews with these people in their 80s who were there in the war, and it was really just like heartbreaking and really intense. And so that a lot of that was the inspiration to for the writing the score. So you have the side of like, I guess, like the logical side, left brain side. Like I'm going to take styles, the classical styles of Beethoven and Bruckner and Wagner, and on the Russian side, Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, and mix that in with this kind of modern sort of film score-esque thing. And then emotionally, like the right brain side, like it has to be just brutal and depressing because that's what it was all about. It was just, there are moments of bravado here and there, moments where either side was like, we're going to win, we have this. And then just towards the end, just complete desperation, like the Germans were losing terribly, and it was just, got to the point where they were eating their own horses, and the Russians were just pissed, and they just wanted it to be over with. And so I did what I could to kind of inject those emotions and experiences into the score.
Job. That's a score I've actually been playing a lot.
Oh, thanks.
Recently with my it's on my gaming list of that score, Mass Effect 3, Advent Rising, Civilization 4. Those are all scores that are on my list that I go through a lot.
Cool.
did a very good job. So you mentioned before how you wanted to work with film, and on your resume it says you were able to do a film score for the film Collisions, which came out in 2011. So what was it like going into, I guess, you said before that was one of your dreams to work with film. What was it like to finally be able to work on an actual film score and contribute to something that ended up on the big screen?
It was fun. I'm not sure what kind of coverage it got. I know that it aired on TV in Germany on a cable channel. And it was just kind of a short deal, but yeah, it was fun to work on. It was kind of like, getting to work on a short kind of compact story was a nice kind of, it was a way to just, I guess, practice in a way. I mean, I've been writing music for, quite a while now, but film is kind of a different beast. I tell people it's kind of like writing one long cinematic scene in a game. It's like it's all set to time and there's no kind of, looping and level music. That whole thing is just, you're writing to a picture and you have to know, when to be quiet and when to just use silence as a tool and then when to bring back music. And yeah, it's interesting. It's a different beast, but I kind of like working on, like Collisions is kind of more of a personal, like a people emotional type story. But, obviously I'm open to other avenues as well.
Okay, so we're going to begin wrapping this up. So the last segment that we'd like to talk about is how you compose. You mentioned how you have a studio in your, that you have all your equipment and keyboards and so on, and you grew up with a studio in your house. So when you compose, you pretty much only use like the computers, or have you been able to use, orchestras, live recordings? What's your approach when you compose music for actually recording the final product?
I haven't actually worked with a lot of live orchestras. In fact, the only experience I've had directly with a piece of mine being recorded live was for Red Orchestra 2, because, choir samples, they're getting better as far as, like believability. Like a lay person listening to it can be fooled by it, but only on the level of just like oohs and ahs, or things like that. When it comes to singing words, it becomes a little trickier. And then on top of that, like singing in Russian, there's no way. I knew that was not going to happen with any kind of sample library. People singing Russian and German, so I figured we have to just use part of the music budget, and get a live choir. So I found a choir in Pennsylvania, and flew out there and spent a couple of days and recorded the live choir for that. So, but other than that, though, and I've worked with soloists, obviously, like on Mass Effect 3, a friend of mine, Jeff Ball, he plays violin. Kills violin, like does a fantastic job, and we usually work together on stuff. So, and he actually did the violin work in Red Orchestra 2 as well, like really just stunning work. So that is like a separate process. Basically, with like live people, when I drop in a soloist, I'll have the part recorded on the computer with like samples first, like a temp track, I guess you could say, and then I'll send Jeff the full track so he can hear like how it's supposed to be performed, and then I'll send him another copy of that full music track minus the temp violin so he can drop his in over it, and then he'll send me his violin track and I'll drop it in. But I try to keep it simple. Like I'm not much of a hardware nut. I guess mostly it comes down to like Chicago is, to have like a really big space or like a proper studio space, it's really, really, really expensive. So, I kind of just operate out of my home. And so I just stick with like, I have a Yamaha keyboard, 88 keys, a Mac Pro, a pair of studio speakers, studio monitors, and it's pretty much it. Like it's a pretty lean setup. So I'm like 95%, 90% software based in my approach. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it answers mine. Do you have another one, Caleb?
Yeah, I have one question regarding that. So you say that most of it's computer generated. Does it, like when you write the notation for the music, is that like directly linked to the sample sets you use, or do you have to like import it into something to get it to come out as sample sets, or like how exactly does that work with your music?
Yeah, there are a lot of different approaches in the way people tend to produce their music. I know some people who prefer to kind of like click in the notes like with a mouse, or some people actually will write it like you said, like notation wise, like sheet music, and then import it. In a lot of different ways that work out. For me personally, I just I don't work with notation directly. Like I just basically hit record and play on the keyboard and then hit stop. and that's like, there's my flute section or something. Like I never actually go into a level of working with notation and sheet music unless it's going to be performed by a live orchestra. And even then, it's like with time constraints, it's often better to just hire an orchestrator where you send them like the MIDI files and the music, and they'll actually pick it out and transcribe to paper for you. So yeah, my the way I work is very kind of I guess I don't know, more organic. I don't believe in like sequencing, like quantizing stuff to the beat, unless it's synth. Like synth stuff, you kind of want in a lot of cases very quantized to the beat. But for orchestral stuff, I just play it in, basically, even if it takes like a few takes to get it right. But yeah, so I use just the keyboard to input that, the MIDI keyboard, I should say, and the mod wheel, which is like key for expression, because a lot of the samples basically are programmed in a way that they respond to the mod wheel, so that as you crank the wheel up, it like the string players will play with more intensity, and so that helps to really create sort of a more humanized performance.
Okay, so you mentioned before that you mentioned Adobe not Sound Booth, Audition. That's what it's called now.
Mm-hmm.
I use Sound Booth. Use Adobe Audition. What other software do you use for your compositions, and what does each bit of software do for your sound?
Sure. Well, Cubase. Cubase is my main sequencer, my only sequencer actually. I've been through a lot over the years. I think it's like every major project I've done has been on a different setup. Like Mass Effect 1 was on Windows actually, running Sonar, and like Red Orchestra 2, I used Logic Pro on a Mac for that one, and I think finally I've settled on Cubase. Just workflow wise, it kind of works for me. So yeah, I run Cubase on a Mac Pro, and all my composition stuff happens within Cubase. My mixing is all within Cubase as well. And people ask about like what plugins I use for post processing and mastering, and I keep it simple there too. I pretty much just mix it all in Cubase and then bounce it out to a WAV file, load that up into Audition, usually just to trim off like tail end or beginning empty space, and then I run it through Isotope Ozone 5, just a final pass for like volume, just a bit of a volume boost. I'm not much into compressing, like the whole loudness war thing. I'm kind of against, people want to just crank it up and make it all loud, but with orchestral, I think it's important to preserve dynamics, and so I just applied, a minimal amount of compression just to make it, volume wise, where they don't have to crank up their volume way up, but not to the point where you're losing information, you're squashing the waveforms. So yeah, really, I mean, a lot of my work is just within Cubase, and then bouncing out a wave into Audition and running a final pass for compression there. And then obviously there's a whole slew of sample libraries and synthesizers, like I mentioned, Arturia for the analog synths. Omnisphere is really excellent. Like if I had to recommend one synthesizer for someone to get that had a really wide array of sounds, Omnisphere would be it for sure. And then for the orchestral stuff, Cinesamples, Cinematic Strings, LA Scoring Strings, Berlin Woodwinds, Spitfire Percussion, and then I've got like a bunch of other kind of random things that I throw in here and there just once in a while.
Okay, so James, do you have any more questions for him, or should we go to the final part?
Actually, man, most everything I was going to ask has already been answered.
Okay, that means it's been thorough.
Very.
Excellent.
So I guess we have two questions left. The first one, what are you working on now, or like what are your future projects that you can actually talk about, and can you give us any hints on what is to come musically from you?
Let me think. Well, I am working on Baldur's Gate 2, extended or enhanced edition. That's pretty much known. There's a couple things on the horizon that are sort of, they're not for sure. So it's just kind of talk, and I can't talk about it obviously, but I'm pretty excited about it if these things work out. And I am starting to basically work on a short film. How much can I say about this? It's not so much a short film. It's kind of like I guess they call them scene selects, where basically they'll do like a scene from what would be a full feature film, and it's presented basically as like, here's a cool concept we have for a film, and then they pitch it to a bunch of studios. So I'm doing the music for that, I guess all I can say is that it's sci-fi, and it is not Mass Effect. I always have to add that now because everything I talk about on Twitter, people are like, "Is it Mass Effect?" I'm like, "No, it's not Mass Effect, guys."
Well, that's because they've talked about the Mass Effect movie for a while, and people are really curious what they'll do. But I'm assuming BioWare will tell us about that one when it's time.
Yeah, yeah. Last I heard, it was on hold. I'm not really sure why or what's going on with it, but yeah, not sure what's going to happen with that. But yeah. So I have the sci-fi short thing I'm doing, and Baldur's Gate 2, and a couple game prospects that we'll see what happens there. I think that's about it.
Do you have any more like CDs being released?
Yes, actually, I'm working on an album ever since, I don't know, it's kind of a running joke now because it's been like since 2008 or 9 where I'm like, yeah, I'm working on an album, and it's just like a question of time. Like I never have time to work on it. So, but this year I've kind of made a resolution to dedicate, one day a week at least just to sit down and write. So, yeah, I do have an album hopefully coming out this year. And that's pretty much it. And the Conclave soundtrack, like I said, is wrapping up, and that soundtrack will be for sale digitally and physically. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about that one. That one has turned out really great.
Okay, so the last question we like to ask all of our guests is not really a question. We basically give them the soapbox so they can talk about whatever they want. They can promote a cause. They can do. Our last guest kind of gave like a little speech. Sometimes they usually promote charities. They promote future films or TV projects, anything they want to promote. So we're going to give you the soapbox so you can tell the listeners to Bombad Radio basically whatever you want because the soapbox is yours.
That's a good question, actually. I like that one. I guess I'm going to promote a cause. There's this organization that is kind of new. It's called Beyond the Final Boss, and basically it's this group of people who work in the video game industry who were bullied as kids. And so the idea is what they do is they get stories from all these people who have successful lives and careers, to share their stories about being bullied when they were younger, and how they overcame it. And then especially like the big point is they want to illustrate how their lives are now, like how positive things are. And so basically I have friends who are involved in that, and then I decided to jump in as well. So I just submitted my story this week, and I think they're publishing it maybe next week. And so yeah, basically I told them like, I'm totally behind this cause, like whatever I can do to help, if they have more features they want to do. Because I don't know, it's funny. A lot of people who are, I think, into video games like big time, and a lot of quote unquote computer nerds. It's like, we had it rough as kids, and I think if there's something that we can do as adults to tell kids who are going through these hard times, like, it definitely gets better. Like, look at, you have no idea what your future holds for you, and just hang in there, and just anything that we can do to put out a positive message to help them get through it. So that is my it's my soapbox.
And if people want to get hold of you or check out your work or check out your current projects and news and so on, where can they go?
Twitter is the best place. Just yeah, Sam Hulick on Twitter. I'm pretty active, and I announce all my stuff there, and yeah, and post pictures of my cats sometimes too.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you. You're the first composer we've had on, and it's been great.
Awesome.
Do you have anything you want to add before we cut off?
No, it's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks for having me. It's been a blast. Yeah.
Definitely has been. Thank you for being on. Is there anything you'd like from us other than me sending it to you when it's done?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you for being on the show, and we wish you the best weekend possible, and good luck with your future endeavors. And we hope to hear more of your music in the future.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, guys.